Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, The Match Begins. The village of Stow Barton was at its most charming that Saturday afternoon. Sunlight slanted through the tall elms bordering the cricket ground, dappling the short, well-rolled grass in patches of gold and shade. The air held the sweetness of cut hay from the nearby fields and the faint tang of linseed oil rising from bats laid neatly along the benches. The sound of children's laughter mingled with the measured clap of applause each time a run was scored, and above it all came the intermittent thwack of leather meeting willow. Hercule Poirot, seated on a folding wooden chair in the shaded marquee, surveyed the scene with a critical eye. He was not, by temperament, a man of the outdoors. Cricket, in particular, left him bewildered. The rules were labyrinthine, the pauses excessive, and the running between wickets struck him as a most inelegant spectacle. Yet he had accepted the invitation of Major Eustace Fairlie, a genial retired officer who resided in the village and had long been eager to show his famous guest the glories of an honest English summer afternoon on the green. "ABN," Poirot murmured to himself, twirling the tips of his moustaches, "it is charming, yes. Picturesque, comme Illinois fort." But for Hercule Poirot? Ah, mon ami, this is endurance, not pleasure. The Major, broad and ruddy-faced, leaned towards him with a chuckle. "Confound it, Poirot, you'll be a convert yet. Nothing better than village cricket. You'll see the very soul of England here today. There's young Latham now, our solicitor chap, steady with the bat, mind you. He could give the county players a lesson or two." Poirot inclined his head politely, his eyes following the man indicated, Henry Latham, tall, spare, with a well-trimmed moustache of his own, though far less distinguished than Poirot's. He wore his whites with precision, his shirt crisply pressed, his movements brisk and efficient. Latham took guard with the air of one accustomed to command both respect and attention. Poirot observed not merely the player but the faces around him. He noted the polite smiles masking deeper animosities, the quick sidelong glances, the subtle stiffening when Latham's name was spoken. A man both admired and disliked, Poirot reflected. It is often so with the successful. The match proceeded at a gentle pace. From the pavilion, tea was served, china cups clinking delicately, the aroma of sponge cakes and cucumber sandwiches wafting across the grass. Ladies in floral dresses fanned themselves with programs, while elderly gentlemen in blazers compared statistics with the solemnity of scholars. Poirot accepted a cup from the vicar's wife, offering a bow and a courtly phrase of thanks. He sipped delicately, though his mind remained elsewhere. His gaze swept the players, then the spectators, cataloguing gestures, tones, and small peculiarities. It was habit, as instinctive to him as breathing. At the crease, Henry Latham faced the bowler, a lean man named Pennington, his law partner, the Major informed Poirot in a conspiratorial aside. Pennington's eyes were narrowed, his jaw set with an intensity out of proportion to so friendly a match. His first delivery was swift and true, Latham met it with a sharp crack, sending the ball to the boundary. Applause rippled, and a faint smile tugged Latham's lips. Over the next few overs, he seemed unassailable, each stroke executed with neat economy. Yet as Poirot continued to watch, his fastidious eye noted something subtle, a faint slackness in the man's posture, the sheen of perspiration more pronounced than the weather alone might warrant. And then, in the midst of a cheer for a well-placed shot, it happened. Latham raised his bat, paused, and swayed visibly. His partner at the other end called sharply, but Latham did not respond. Instead, he dropped the bat, his hand clutching at his chest, and staggered 2 paces forward before collapsing face-first upon the pitch. For a moment, disbelief froze the crowd. The umpire rushed forward, followed by Pennington and several others. Cries rang out, "Fetch the doctor!" Give him air." And women clutched at one another, gasping. The doctor, a brisk man who had been seated in the marquee, was already striding quickly across the turf. Poirot rose too, though not in panic. His eyes, sharp and intent, registered every detail, the precise shade of blue upon the fallen man's lips, the sudden frantic shouts, the oddly delayed reaction of one or two in the crowd. His mind, cool and ordered, assembled these impressions into quiet suspicion. Within minutes the doctor knelt beside Latham, fingers seeking a pulse. His face tightened. He attempted resuscitation, but Poirot, standing a few paces back, could already foresee the outcome. Finally, the doctor sat back upon his heels, shaking his head gravely. "I regret to say," he announced, "that Mr. Latham is dead." A murmur ran through the assembly, part shock, part incredulity. The major muttered something about sunstroke. Others nodded eagerly, seizing on the explanation, yet Poirot's voice cut through, calm and precise. "Non, monsieur," he said softly, though all heard him. "This is not sunstroke. Regardez, the lips, the faint odor, yes, this, I think, is something most unnatural." Eyes turned to him in astonishment. Major fairly sputtered, "Surely, Poirot, you don't mean—" Poirot lifted a hand, elegant and firm. "I do not mean, I know nothing yet. But Hercule Poirot, he observes. And what I observe, it does not satisfy the theory of sunstroke." The crowd stirred uneasily, whispers darting like quick birds among the villagers. Some drew back, as though a taint of menace had fallen upon their pleasant summer afternoon. Others leaned forward, curiosity already sparking. Poirot alone remained composed, his gaze resting thoughtfully on the fallen bat, the nearby jug of lemonade, the cricket ball lying abandoned upon the grass. Slowly he twirled the ends of his moustache and murmured, as though to himself, "Voila! The little drama begins." Chapter 2, Whispers of Poison. The body of Henry Latham was carried with solemn dignity into the pavilion, laid upon a long oak table hastily cleared of teapots and scorebooks. The cricket ground, so merry an hour before, now wore an uneasy air. Children were hurried home by anxious mothers, the players, their whites smudged with dust, clustered in uneasy knots, voices lowered. The sun still shone, but it seemed to Poirot that the light itself had grown harsher, cruelly indifferent to human suffering. Poirot remained seated a while, his head bowed, fingers steepled beneath his chin. He had long since learned that the first moments after a crime, or an unexplained death, were the most fertile. In the shock and confusion, people revealed themselves, let slip gestures and words they might later conceal. His eyes, bright and bird-like, roved over the scene, cataloguing every face. The doctor emerged from the pavilion, wiping his hands with a handkerchief already streaked with sweat. He cleared his throat and addressed the crowd, now gathered in an expectant semicircle. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have examined Mr. Latham. I cannot say with certainty, but I find his death to be unusual. He was in robust health. There was no warning, no known condition that would have struck so suddenly." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Someone whispered, "Heart failure." Another, "An apoplexy." But the doctor raised a hand. "It is possible, of course. Yet there are indications, the bluish lips, for example, that suggest a more sinister cause. Until a post-mortem can be conducted, I cannot be precise. But I will not disguise from you that I harbor suspicions of poison." The word fell like a stone into a still pond. Poison. The genteel air of the cricket match seemed to shiver. Teacups trembled in hands suddenly unsteady. Women gasped. A man coughed violently as though he, too, feared some hidden substance lay in his throat. Poirot observed calmly, though within him the little grey cell stirred in satisfaction. His own instincts had not been mistaken. Poison, the weapon of the subtle, the cowardly, and often the clever. Major fairly blustered. Poison? Nonsense, Doctor. This is Stowe Barton, not the back streets of Paris. Who on earth would do such a thing here? Poirot's voice, smooth and precise, interjected. Ah, Major, one must never think a peaceful place is free from crime. On the contrary, it is where crime hides itself best. It takes but one discontented heart, one secret quarrel, and suddenly the serpent shows itself in paradise. The Major looked somewhat affronted, but the villagers, superstitiously respectful of Poirot's reputation, fell silent. From the cluster nearest the pavilion stepped Mr. Charles Pennington, the bowler who had last delivered to Latham. His face was pale, his dark hair disordered from running his hands through it. He spoke with the strained politeness of one fighting an inner turmoil. Surely, Monsieur Poirot, you cannot believe what the doctor suggests. That Henry was murdered, here, in full view of us all? Impossible. Poirot regarded him with a mild gaze. Impossible? No, monsieur. Difficult, audacious, yes. But not impossible. And yet it is curious, is it not? A man collapses in the midst of play, he alone, of all those present. The question must be asked, why him? Pennington's lips tightened, but before he could reply, a new voice intruded. It is true, said Miss Emily Ward, the school teacher. She was small, neat, with a determined chin and eyes that missed little. Mr. Latham had enemies. He quarrelled openly. Only yesterday I saw him speaking sharply to Mr. Pennington, there, outside the offices. There was a collective intake of breath. All eyes turned to Pennington, who flushed a dusky red. That is absurd, he snapped. A business disagreement, nothing more. Anyone in practice together will have disputes. He was a difficult man at times. Poirot lifted a hand gently. ABN, mademoiselle, thank you. Such observations are of interest. But we must not rush to judgment. Anger, quarrels, these do not always lead to crime. Sometimes, yes. Often, no. The vicar, tall and thin, with a benign but troubled expression, now stepped forward. If I may, it is true that Mr. Latham and I differed strongly over parish accounts. He accused me of carelessness. But such disputes are not uncommon in village life. It is unthinkable that they should end in murder. His voice faltered on the word. Poirot bowed his head politely. It is always unthinkable, until it is thought. A silence fell. Then came a shrill voice from the back. What about Mrs. Latham? All turned to see Mrs. Winthrop, a notorious gossip, craning forward eagerly. He was not an easy husband. Everyone knows it. Perhaps. The Major cut her off sharply. That will do, Mrs. Winthrop. We'll not have slander in the midst of grief. But Poirot filed the remark carefully in his memory. No detail was too small. He moved then, discreetly, towards the refreshment table. The tea urn gleamed benignly, the lemonade jug stood half empty, slices of sponge cake remained on their plates. To most eyes, these were innocent accompaniments to a summer's afternoon. To Poirot, they were potential instruments of death. He bent, delicately lifting a china cup between thumb and forefinger. His nostrils flared. Was there the faintest trace of bitterness? He could not be sure. The doctor joined him. Do you think it possible, Monsieur Poirot, that the poison was administered through something he drank? Possible? Yes. Probable? Perhaps. But it would be too simple, would it not? 1 cup of tea, 1 glass of lemonade, these are things easily shared. And yet only he is dead. None, there is something here more cunning, more personal. He straightened, his gaze sweeping again across the gathering. Some avoided his eyes, others met them too readily. Suspicion hung in the air like a mist. Poirot spoke softly, almost to himself. Whispers, accusations, little enmities, they rise now like the smoke from a fire not yet seen. The question, Miss Amos, is whether this smoke comes from the true blaze, or whether it is but a smoke screen. Chapter 3, Suspicions on the Sidelines. The village of Stow Barton, though small, possessed the inexhaustible capacity for speculation that is the hallmark of close-knit communities. By the following morning, the tragedy at the cricket ground had become the sole subject of conversation. The baker's customers leaned over counters whispering theories, while in the post office, letters were weighed and stamped amid conjectures of murder most foul. Even the blacksmith's forge rang with talk of poison, though his hammer blows did not falter. In such an atmosphere, truth became a rare commodity, swiftly smothered beneath the thick quilt of rumour. Yet for Hercule Poirot, this was fertile soil indeed. He strolled through the village with his measured, dignified gait, his immaculate suit and patent leather shoes seeming out of place on the dusty lanes. But Poirot cared little for appearances. What he sought were not facts, those could be twisted, but the small betrayals of the human heart. He paused outside the inn, the King's Arms, where several of the cricket players now gathered over their morning pints. Their voices carried to the street, low and urgent. Poirot slipped inside, his presence instantly silencing the group. He bowed politely, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Messrs, forgive the intrusion. Hercule Poirot desires only a little refreshment. May I join you?" They shifted uneasily, but none dared refuse. Poirot ordered a small black coffee, he would never compromise his digestion with English ale, and seated himself at their table. The captain of the cricket team, Mr. Robert Henshaw, a stout man with a genial face now clouded, spoke first. "You must understand, Monsieur Poirot, this business has shocked us all." Henry, Mr. Latham, was a pillar of the village. A hard man, yes, but respected. Poirot inclined his head. Respected, and feared, perhaps. There was a silence. Then one of the younger men, a farmer's son, muttered, "Feared, aye. He could be ruthless in court. My uncle lost his farm after Latham's clever talking." Henshaw frowned. "That is as may be, but the law is the law. He was only doing his duty." Poirot sipped his coffee delicately. "And yet, you see, duty often leaves behind the bitterness. One must ask oneself, among so many, who had the bitterness strong enough to kill." The men shifted again, and Poirot noted the quick, guilty glance they cast towards the corner where Charles Pennington sat alone, his pint untouched. His face was haggard, his hands restless. Poirot rose, approached him gently, and spoke in a voice meant for his ears alone. "Monsieur, forgive me if I intrude upon your grief. But yesterday it was said you and Mr. Latham argued." Pennington looked up sharply, colour flooding his cheeks. "We disagreed, yes. Over money. But it was nothing unusual. Do you think I would kill him in the middle of a cricket match, before half the village?" Poirot raised his eyebrows. "There is the audacity, you see. To do the thing in the full view, who would suspect it? Such is sometimes the cleverest disguise." Pennington's eyes darkened. "Clever? If you think that, then you never knew Henry. He was the clever one, always holding the winning cards. I was the junior partner. I stood to lose everything if he pressed matters further. But murder, no. I would not." Poirot did not press him. He merely nodded, storing away the tone of despair in the man's voice. Despair, Poirot knew, could drive even the meek to desperate acts. Later that day, Poirot found himself in the vicarage garden, invited politely by the vicar and his wife. The roses were in bloom, but the vicar's face was drawn. He poured tea with trembling hands. "I cannot think why God has permitted this," he murmured. A man struck down so suddenly, in the prime of life. Though he hesitated. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze intent. Though. The vicar sighed. I must not speak ill of the dead. But Henry Latham was relentless in his criticisms. He accused me of mishandling funds. I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, it was no more than an oversight, but he threatened to bring the matter before the diocesan authorities. It would have ruined me. His wife laid a hand gently upon his arm. Henry enjoyed wielding power, she said quietly. He liked to remind people of their mistakes. There are those in this village who hated him for it. Poirot nodded gravely. Hatred, it is the seed from which crime may grow. Yet tell me, madam, did he have enemies also, in the heart? She hesitated. Poirot saw a faint colour rise to her cheeks. There were rumours, years ago, that Henry was overfond of certain ladies. Nothing proven, of course. Village gossip. Poirot smiled faintly. Gossip, yes. But you see, madam, it is like smoke. It may be of nothing, it may be the sign of fire. In the afternoon, Poirot walked by the schoolhouse where Miss Emily Ward was tidying her desk. She welcomed him with brisk politeness, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. I suppose you've come to ask me what I saw, she said. I'm not one for embroidery. I tell things plain. Poirot inclined his head. Mademoiselle, plainness is a virtue I admire greatly. She folded her hands. Yes, I saw them quarrelling, Pennington and Latham. It was no small matter. Pennington looked ready to strike him. If you ask me, he had cause. Poirot studied her carefully. And you, mademoiselle, had you cause? Her eyes widened, then narrowed. Me? What possible cause could I have? Poirot smiled. One must never dismiss the small detail. Perhaps a word spoken in anger, an insult given? I have observed, you are a woman of spirit. And a woman of spirit, she does not take lightly the disdain of a man. Miss Ward flushed. Mr. Latham mocked me once, it is true. Over a matter of the children's schooling. He said a woman's place was in the kitchen, not in the classroom. I told him I would not forget it. But words are words, Monsieur Poirot. I would not kill for them. Poirot bowed slightly. Perhaps not. But I thank you for your honesty. As evening descended, Poirot returned to the Major's house where he was staying. The Major greeted him with a tumbler of whiskey and a worried scowl. Dash it all, Poirot, you've been ferreting about all day, and what have you got? Half the village had some quarrel with Latham, that's plain. But who among them would stoop to poison? Poirot smiled serenely, refusing the whiskey in favour of his tisane. Mon cher Major, do not despair. Already I see patterns, the little threads. It is as always, when many had reason, one alone had opportunity. That is the difference. We must find not only who hated, but who struck. The Major grunted, unconvinced. Poirot sipped his tisane with contentment. His eyes, however, gleamed with quiet certainty. Patience, mon ami, he murmured. The little grey cells, they are at work. Chapter 4, The Curious Cup. The next morning dawned pale and grey, as though the heavens themselves reflected the village's disquiet. A thin mist clung to the cricket ground, softening the outlines of the pavilion and the posts of the scoreboard. It was here that Hercule Poirot arrived promptly after breakfast, his patent leather shoes gleaming incongruously against the damp grass. To most eyes, the cricket ground was no more than a familiar place rendered uncanny by tragedy. But to Poirot, it was a stage upon which the drama had been played, and he came now as stage manager to study the scenery before the actors returned. Inside the pavilion, the air was heavy with the mingled scents of Polish, turf, and faintly sour milk left from hastily abandoned refreshments. The long oak table still bore marks where the body had lain, though it had been cleared of teacups and crumbs. Yet Poirot's sharp gaze instantly detected what had been missed in the confusion: a small stack of cups, rinsed but not thoroughly dried, their rims still faintly smudged. He bent over them with the tenderness of a jeweler examining precious stones. One cup, placed a little apart from the others, drew his attention. It was a plain china cup like the rest, yet faint traces of powder clung to the interior, so faint that the casual eye would have dismissed them as harmless dust. Poirot, however, was not casual. He drew from his pocket a small paper envelope and, with the precision of a surgeon, used a folded scrap of paper to collect the residue. "Voila," he murmured. "The evidence," she whispers, but one must bend low to hear her. As he worked, the door creaked and the village doctor entered, his expression grave. "I thought I might find you here, Monsieur Poirot. The post-mortem has not yet been conducted, but I remain convinced. Poison." Poirot inclined his head. "Your observations, docteur, they match my own. And see, this cup, it tells a tale." Monsieur Latham alone drank from it. The doctor frowned. "You believe the poison was in his tea?" "Perhaps. But one must not leap too quickly. Reflect, mon ami, the cup, it can be changed. A little powder placed after he drinks, to mislead us. Is it not possible?" The doctor's brow furrowed. "You mean, the poison cup may itself be a false trail?" "Just so. A red herring, as you English so charmingly say. One must consider not only what is shown, but why it is shown. Who wished us to see this cup?" The doctor looked uneasy. "This grows darker with every word." Poirot smiled faintly. "Murder, it is always dark, yet the solution, it is light, precise, like the cut of a diamond." By mid-morning, the pavilion had begun to fill again. The coroner's men had come, the constable with his notebook, and a scattering of villagers drawn by curiosity. Among them, Poirot noted Mrs. Winthrop, the tireless gossip, hovering with an air of anticipation. The vicar, solemn as a tomb, entered soon after, his eyes avoiding those of his parishioners. Poirot moved with elegance among them, asking questions in his soft, courteous manner. To Mrs. Winthrop, "Tell me, madam, you poured the lemonade yesterday, did you not?" "Ah, yes, and was Mr. Latham served by you?" She preened under his attention, insisting she remembered nothing unusual, though she added slyly that Mrs. Latham looked pale as death herself after the collapse. Poirot nodded, letting her chatter flow unchecked. To the vicar, "Oh, monsieur, when last did you speak with Mr. Latham?" The vicar shifted uncomfortably. "Only 2 days ago, regarding parish accounts. Our conversation was not cordial." "But surely you do not suspect?" Poirot raised a hand. "Suspect? None. I only observe. It is the small details that reveal the large truths." At noon, Poirot took tea with Major Fairlie on the veranda of his house overlooking the green. The Major, still indignant, waved a cigar for emphasis. "I cannot believe it of Pennington, mind you, even with the quarrel. He's a poor fellow, not a killer. But poison, subtle stuff, eh? That's a woman's weapon, I've always heard." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "So they say, mon ami. But generalities, they are dangerous. A man may stab, a woman may shoot, and either may poison. It is not the weapon, but the psychology behind it." The Major harumphed. "Still, what about the cup you found? That's clear enough, isn't it?" Poirot shook his head gently. "Clear? No, no, my friend. It is like the mirror that shows too much, so that you do not trust it. Consider, if one wished to kill in secret, why not choose a method subtle and untraceable? Instead, we find a cup with traces left carelessly behind. Does this strike you as the work of a clever murderer? The Major frowned, chewing the end of his cigar. You think it's deliberate, then? Meant to send us down the wrong path? Poirot inclined his head. Precisely. The murderer wishes us to believe Latham drank his death. But Hercule Poirot, I ask, what if he did not? In the afternoon, Poirot returned alone to the cricket ground. The sun had burned away the mist, and the air shimmered with heat. He walked slowly to the centre pitch, where a faint brown mark still marred the grass, the place where Latham had fallen. He bent, examining the soil, the trampled blades. His hand hovered over the cricket ball, now returned to its case. He lifted it delicately, turning it in the light. There was something odd, a faint discoloration on one side, scarcely visible. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Tiens. A clue, perhaps overlooked. But he replaced the ball carefully. It was not yet time to declare what he suspected. The cup, the ball, both pointed, perhaps, to the same hand. Yet which was genuine, which a decoy? That puzzle delighted him. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the elms, Poirot sat at his window, gazing thoughtfully upon the quiet village green. To any passer-by he seemed at ease, sipping his tisane. Yet within his mind, the little grey cells were in furious motion. He reviewed each conversation, each glance, each hesitation. The poisoned cup, perhaps genuine, perhaps a mask. The ball, discoloured, peculiar. The quarrels, Pennington, the vicar, the villagers wronged by Latham's ruthless practice. The whispered rumours of affairs. Each thread wove itself into a tapestry of suspicion, yet the pattern was not complete. Poirot allowed himself a small smile. Patience, Hercule. Already the murderer has revealed more than he thinks. One detail, one moment of vanity, and I shall have him. For murder, no matter how clever, it cannot resist leaving behind its signature. He set down his cup, smoothed his moustache with satisfaction, and whispered, the truth, she comes. Step by step, she comes. Chapter 5, Red Herrings. The village of Stow Barton awoke the following day to a storm of talk. The inquest had not yet been held, the coroner had made no declaration, but to the villagers the verdict was already plain, Henry Latham had been poisoned. By whom, however, was another matter entirely. On that point, imagination ran riot. At the baker's, a farmer's wife declared that the vicar's sermons had grown harsher since Latham accused him of embezzling parish funds. At the butcher's, someone whispered that Mrs. Latham had wept bitterly only a week before, overheard muttering that she wished herself free. By the time the gossip reached the smithy, it was said that the cricket captain, Robert Henshaw, had lost money to Latham in a private wager. Each tale grew in colour as it passed from lip to lip. Poirot, walking with immaculate dignity along the high street, listened with an air of polite detachment. He knew too well that gossip was like smoke, it clouded the vision, but somewhere beneath it a fire might indeed burn. His task was to distinguish the smoke of invention from the smoke that rose from truth. At the Major's house that morning, Poirot found the gentleman pacing the drawing-room, a newspaper crumpled in his fist. Confound these villagers! Fairly exploded. They're saying Latham had affairs, that he treated his wife badly, that he was a tyrant in business. Half of it's slander, I'd wager. Still, he paused, his ruddy face troubled. There must be something in it, else he wouldn't have had so many enemies. Poirot inclined his head gravely. Yes, Major, that is precisely so. Monsieur Latham, he was a man who enjoyed power. And those who enjoy power, they gather both admirers and enemies. That he was murdered, it is almost certain. That many had motive, it is beyond doubt. But motive alone, it is not enough. The Major sank heavily into a chair. Well then, what is enough? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Opportunity, my friend. Opportunity, and the psychology. A murderer always leaves behind a trace of the mind, the little signature. That, it is what I seek. Later that morning, Poirot made his way to the Latham residence, a handsome brick house on the edge of the village. Mrs. Latham received him in a parlour heavy with curtains and the faint scent of lavender. She was a woman of delicate build, her features pale, her eyes shadowed. I can hardly bear to speak of it, she said softly, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. Henry was difficult at times. Ambitious, exacting. But he was my husband. Poirot's gaze rested gently upon her. Madam, forgive me, but there are whispers of unhappiness. You understand, I must ask, did you ever fear him? She flinched, her lips tightening. Fear him? No, not fear. He could be sharp with words, and yes, he demanded obedience. But I would never, her voice broke, and she pressed the handkerchief to her eyes. To suggest I poisoned him, it is wicked. Poirot inclined his head. Madam, I do not suggest. I only seek to understand. Often, those who are close, they see what others cannot. She raised her gaze suddenly, fierce through her tears. If you want truth, Monsieur Poirot, I will tell you this, Henry had enemies aplenty. He humiliated men in court, exposed their lies, cost them their fortunes. And he had secrets too, letters, papers he kept locked in his office. He meant to reveal something soon. Perhaps it was that which killed him. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Ah, that is most interesting. That afternoon, Poirot visited Robert Henshaw, the cricket captain. The man was uneasy, his genial face strained. He welcomed Poirot with forced cheer, offering a cigar. Monsieur Poirot, he said, I'll not deny it, I once lost money to Latham in a foolish bet. But that was years ago. We remained friends after, of a sort. I had no reason to wish him harm. Poirot smiled benignly. And yet, monsieur, you were near him when he collapsed. Henshaw frowned. Yes, but so were half the team. Surely you don't mean? Poirot raised a hand. I mean nothing, I suggest nothing. But I observe. That is my method. Henshaw muttered something indistinct, his eyes sliding away. Poirot noted it. Such evasions were never wasted upon him. As the day waned, Poirot took a slow walk across the green. The air was golden, filled with the drone of bees. Children played, though their laughter seemed subdued. From an upstairs window, Mrs. Winthrop, the gossip, leaned out eagerly, her eyes following Poirot. She called down, they say the vicar's wife had a fondness for Mr. Latham. That's why the quarrel about money became so bitter. Did you know that, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot bowed courteously. Madam, I hear many things. But whether they are true, that is another matter. He continued his walk, his mind occupied. Each rumour, each whispered suspicion, these were the red herrings that clouded the waters. He must tread carefully, lest he too be led astray. At dinner that evening with Major Fairlie, Poirot spoke thoughtfully. There is a saying, my friend, in a pond full of fish, it is the red herring that smells strongest. So it is with murder. The true clue, it hides quietly, while the false ones cry out. The Major grunted. And how in blazes do you tell the difference? Poirot smiled. By psychology. The false clue, it is too loud, too perfect. It is what the murderer wishes us to see. The true clue, it is modest, unassuming. It whispers only to those who listen. The Major shook his head. I'll never fathom it. But you'll get to the bottom of it, eh? Poirot sipped his tisane, his eyes gleaming. Yes, Major. Step by step, the truth approaches. Already, I see the pattern forming. Soon, it will be complete. He leaned back, his fingers steepled, and murmured, but first, we must follow the Herrings, red though they may be. For in the chase, the murderer will reveal himself. That night, as the village settled into uneasy slumber, Poirot remained wakeful, pacing his room. He considered the poisoned cup, so obvious it must be false. He considered the ball, with its faint stain. He considered the rumors, affairs, quarrels, debts. All distractions, yet within them, perhaps, a kernel of truth. At last he sat, smoothing his moustache with satisfaction. Voila, he whispered. The murderer thinks to deceive with many false trails. But Hercule Poirot, he does not follow the crowd. He listens to the heart, and the heart, it cannot lie. And with that thought, he extinguished the lamp, the little grey cell still dancing busily in the dark. Chapter 6. The net tightens. 2 days after the fatal match, the inquest had yet to conclude, but the atmosphere in Stowe Barton was already taut as a drawn bowstring. Doors were closed more firmly, conversation ceased abruptly when footsteps approached, and in the pubs and parlours the whispers continued, who poisoned Henry Latham? Poirot, however, was not one to be swayed by the gossip of the crowd. He had spent the morning quietly in the pavilion, alone save for the occasional curious villager peering through the windows. There, upon the polished wooden table, he laid out his evidence, the china cup with its faint dusting of powder, and the cricket ball whose surface bore a barely perceptible stain. He leaned close, his moustaches twitching, and studied the ball as a jeweller would a flawed diamond. The discoloration was faint, but unmistakable. Poirot ran a gloved fingertip over it, then sniffed delicately. There was a trace, bitter, acrid. Not tea, not dust, but something altogether more sinister. Voila, he murmured. The poison, she is not in the cup alone. None, she hides here, upon the very emblem of the game itself. And our batsman, poor Monsieur Latham, he was a man of habit. He licked his fingers before each stroke, yes. Thus he carried his death to his lips, while all the village looked on, never suspecting. At that moment, the village doctor entered, summoned by Poirot the evening before. Poirot gestured to the ball with a flourish. Doctor, I would ask you to confirm what my little grey cells already whisper. The residue, analyze it, Illinois Vaus Plat. I believe it will match the alkaloid you suspected from Monsieur Latham's symptoms. The doctor bent, examined, and after some minutes nodded grimly. You are correct. A rare alkaloid, difficult to trace, but unmistakable once known. This was no accident. The ball was coated, deliberately. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Exactment. And who touches the ball most frequently, doctor? The answer was obvious. The bowler. That afternoon Poirot requested the presence of Charles Pennington, the deceased's business partner and the man who had bowled the fatal delivery. Pennington arrived reluctantly, his face drawn, his movements stiff. Another round of questions, Monsieur Poirot, he said bitterly. I feel already half condemned by this village. Must I repeat again, I did not kill him. Poirot smiled gently. You must forgive me, monsieur. It is not repetition I seek, but the psychology. You quarrelled with Latham, yes? He threatened your position, your livelihood. Pennington's mouth tightened. He did. He accused me of mishandling accounts. He said he would expose me, ruin me. But words are not poison, Monsieur Poirot. A quarrel does not make a murderer. Poirot tilted his head. No? Sometimes it does, monsieur. But let us speak of cricket. You were the bowler. The ball, it passed most often through your hands. If a poison were placed upon it, who better than you to administer it unnoticed? For a moment Pennington's eyes flared with panic. Then he mastered himself, his voice harsh. "You think I would risk the eyes of the whole village upon me? You think I would smear poison on a cricket ball in front of 50 witnesses? It's madness." Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Not madness, monsieur, audacity. To strike in full view is to conceal oneself most cleverly. All believe it impossible. And yet, here we are." Pennington rose suddenly, his hands trembling. "I will hear no more of this." He strode to the door, then halted. "Latham was my partner. He was a tyrant, yes, but he was also my livelihood. If he had been exposed, I would have lost everything, but if he died, I lost it just the same. Think on that, Poirot, before you condemn me." He left abruptly, the door slamming behind him. Poirot remained still, his expression unreadable. At last he murmured, "It is true. If Latham dies, Pennington loses also. But then, what if the loss is less than the ruin? What if death was the only escape?" That evening, Poirot gathered several villagers in the Major's drawing room, the vicar, Robert Henshaw, Miss Emily Ward, and Mrs. Latham. All came with tense expressions, wary of what was to come. Poirot greeted them with courtesy, then stood before the fireplace, his hands folded. "Mesdames, messers," he began, "we are surrounded by whispers, by rumors. Each one is a red herring, leading us away from the truth. But the truth, she is simple, elegant. Already she begins to show herself." They watched him closely, though some with resentment. Poirot continued, his voice low and precise. "The cup, yes, the cup with its traces of powder. It is meant to mislead. Too obvious, too clumsy. The murderer wished us to think Latham drank his death. But I, Hercule Poirot, I look further. And what do I find? The cricket ball, with its stain. That, Miss Amos, was the true weapon." Mrs. Latham gasped, covering her mouth. The vicar murmured a prayer. Henshaw shook his head, incredulous. Poirot pressed on. Latham was a man of habit. He wetted his fingers before each stroke. The poison was transferred thus, and he carried it to his lips. Subtle, ingenious, and executed in plain sight. He paused, letting the words sink in. Then he added softly, and only one man had the ball in his hand at the crucial moment. All eyes turned to Pennington, though he was not present. The silence was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the clock. When at last the gathering dispersed, Poirot remained by the fire, alone with Major Fairlie. The Major rubbed his chin uneasily. "So it was Pennington after all? By Jove, I almost like the fellow. But you've trapped him neatly, Poirot. No one else could have done it." Poirot's eyes gleamed, though he shook his head slightly. Non, Major. Be careful. To say no one else could have done it, that is always dangerous. There is always another possibility. And yet, he smiled faintly. The net, she tightens. Soon, the fish, he will wriggle no more. The Major exhaled. "I only hope you're right. The village won't rest until this is settled." Poirot raised his cup of tisane, sipped delicately, and murmured, "Rest assured, mon ami. The truth, she does not hide forever. The murderer has already revealed himself, though perhaps he does not yet know it." And with that enigmatic remark, Poirot turned his gaze to the fire, where the flames curled and whispered like secrets ready to be told. Chapter 7: Gathering of the Players. By the time the church bells of Stow Barton chimed 7 on the evening following Latham's death, the entire village seemed aware of Hercule Poirot's summons. The Belgian detective had insisted, that all who had been close to Henry Latham, or who had stood upon the green that fateful afternoon, gather in the village hall. It was an extraordinary affair. The hall, usually home to parish meetings and flower shows, had been transformed into a kind of courtroom. Wooden chairs stood in rows, the long trestle table at the front reserved for Poirot himself. Lamps glowed softly, throwing warm pools of light across the polished floor, while the shadows clung in the corners. There was an air of expectancy, heavy with curiosity and dread. The villagers arrived in twos and threes, murmuring. Mrs. Winthrop, triumphant at being included, bustled in with her shawl flapping. Miss Emily Ward entered briskly, a schoolmistress even in her walk, her sharp eyes already scanning the assembly. The vicar, pale and grave, guided his wife to a seat, while Robert Henshaw, the cricket captain, slumped heavily at the back. Mrs. Latham arrived last, a figure of sorrow in black, her face hidden beneath a veil. And there, apart from them all, sat Charles Pennington, the dead man's partner. His face was drawn, his hands restless, but his eyes smouldered with resentment. He knew he was under suspicion, and the weight of it hung upon him like a chain. Poirot entered quietly, impeccably dressed as always, his shoes gleaming, his moustaches immaculate. He moved to the front of the hall, placed his gloves neatly upon the table, and surveyed the gathering with a gaze both courteous and commanding. "Mesdames, messieurs," he began, his voice calm, carrying easily to every corner. "You wonder why I have called you here. It is because the murderer of Henry Latham sits among us." A murmur rippled through the hall, half gasp, half disbelief. Poirot raised a hand, and silence returned. "Do not be alarmed. I shall not accuse until I am sure. But know this, the truth, she is already here, hidden in your words, your gestures, your little silences. Hercule Poirot, he has only to arrange them, like the pieces of a puzzle." He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "First, we had the whispers. The quarrels with the vicar, with Monsieur Pennington, with many others. The rumours of debts, of infidelities, of harsh words spoken. Motives, they are plenty, mais oui. But motive alone, it does not kill. None. For that, there must be means, and there must be opportunity." His gaze swept the room, pausing here and there with deliberate weight. "The cup, ah yes, the cup with its powder. It was meant to deceive us, to say, Latham drank his death. Too obvious, too easy. It was a trick. The true weapon was cleverer, more audacious." He turned suddenly, his eyes gleaming. "The cricket ball!" Gasps erupted. Mrs. Winthrop clutched at her shawl. The vicar crossed himself. Pennington's lips tightened into a grim line. Poirot continued, his voice smooth and relentless. "The ball, Miss Amos. Upon its leather surface was poison, subtle, rare. And Monsieur Latham, he was a man of habit. He wetted his fingers upon his lips before each stroke. Thus he carried his death into his own body, while you all looked on, seeing nothing." He paused, allowing the weight of the revelation to sink in. The hall was utterly silent save for the tick of the clock on the far wall. "And who touched the ball most?" Poirot asked softly. "Who held it again and again, whose fingers alone could coat it with such a substance?" All eyes turned, almost unwillingly, toward Pennington. He shifted uneasily, but his voice rang out harshly, "You mean me? Of course you do. You think because I quarrelled with him, because I bowled the ball, I must have killed him. But I tell you, I did not. It's too simple. Too convenient." Poirot regarded him with a small, enigmatic smile. "Just so, monsieur. It is too convenient. That is why I have not yet named you." A ripple of surprise swept the assembly. Pennington stared, speechless. Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, Miss Amos. The murderer is clever. He wished us to believe the bowler must be guilty. But reflect, would not the bowler be the most obvious suspect? Would a man with intelligence enough to devise such a plan choose to condemn himself so clearly? None. It is too clumsy. He paced again, his small figure radiating control. No, the murderer is one who understood psychology. One who knew we would all leap to accuse Pennington. One who took advantage of his quarrels with Latham to hide behind them. The poisoned cup, the poisoned ball, they are diversions, each pointing us toward the wrong conclusion. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. Poirot's voice dropped lower, more intimate. And yet, he said, the truth, she leaves her mark. There was one among you who betrayed himself, or herself, not in action, but in reaction. When I spoke of the poisoned ball, that person revealed fear, not surprise. A fear too great, too instinctive, to be feigned. He let his gaze rest upon them, one by one, his eyes glittering. The silence grew unbearable. Even the clock seemed to hesitate in its ticking. At last, Poirot straightened. Tomorrow, Miss Amos, I shall reveal all. But tonight you must reflect. Ask yourselves, who among you gains by Latham's death? Who among you is clever enough to poison in plain sight? And who among you trembled when the truth of the cricket ball was spoken? He gathered his gloves, bowed slightly, and turned toward the door. Then he paused, looking back with a faint smile. Tomorrow evening, here again, Hercule Poirot will give you the answer. And the murderer, he will have no place left to hide. With that, he departed, leaving behind a hall buzzing with nervous whispers and half-suppressed fears. Each villager glanced at the other, wondering, was it you? Was it me? And in every mind, suspicion bloomed like a poisonous flower. That night, the village of Stow Barton slept uneasily. Windows were barred, whispers carried through half-closed doors, and dreams were restless. And in one house at least, someone lay awake, staring into the dark, knowing that Hercule Poirot had already seen too much, that the net was tightening, and that the game, like the match on the green, was drawing toward its final over. Chapter 8. Poirot Strikes True. The village hall was crowded once again the following evening. The anticipation that hung in the air was palpable, heavier even than at the inquest itself. People shifted uneasily in their chairs, whispered to their neighbors, and cast furtive glances at those seated across from them. Every person who had stood on the cricket green when Henry Latham collapsed was present: Mrs. Latham, pale and veiled, Charles Pennington, looking haggard and defiant, the vicar and his wife, grave but trembling, Robert Henshaw, his captain's blazer crumpled in his restless hands, Miss Emily Ward, erect and sharp-eyed, and Mrs. Winthrop, practically quivering with the thrill of scandal. Into this charged atmosphere walked Hercule Poirot, small, immaculate, and composed, as though he were not merely a man but the very conductor of this orchestra of human passion. He bowed slightly, moved to the trestle table at the front, and rested his hands upon it, surveying the assembly with the calm gaze of one who holds all the cards. Mesdames, messieurs, he began softly, you have waited with patience. Tonight, you shall wait no longer. The murderer of Henry Latham shall be named. A collective murmur ran through the room. Poirot raised a finger, silencing them. First, let us speak of the false trails. The cup, that cup with the powder. How neat, how obvious. Too neat, too obvious. It was placed for us to find, to whisper, here is the poison. But it was a lie. It was meant to draw the little grey cells away from the truth. He paced slowly, his patent leather shoes clicking against the floor. And then, the cricket ball. There lay the genius of the crime. Poison upon the leather, invisible, deadly. And Monsieur Latham, he was a man of habit. He licked his fingers, he passed them to his lips, and so he died, before the eyes of all. No suspicion, until too late. All eyes turned, almost unwillingly, to Pennington. He stiffened, his hands gripping the chair arms, his face pale with strain. Poirot's gaze rested upon him with delicate weight. Yes, Monsieur Pennington, it would seem to all that you are guilty. You, the bowler, who handled the ball. You, the man who quarrelled with Latham. You, who had so much to lose. It was intended we should believe this, and indeed for a moment, even Hercule Poirot was tempted. But he paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. But it is too perfect. Too convenient. Too much the work of a murderer who seeks to be caught. A murmur ran through the hall. Pennington's head dropped into his hands. Poirot's eyes gleamed. No, Miss Amos. The true murderer is cleverer than that. He wished Pennington to stand condemned. He made the quarrel, the opportunity, the poison ball, all point to him. But the truth, she hides in the psychology. You remember, I said always, it is the psychology that betrays. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the assembly. Consider, who here was calm when the poisoned cup was discovered? Almost all. But when I spoke of the poisoned ball, one among you showed fear, not surprise. A fear instinctive, uncontrollable. That, Miss Amos, was the betrayal. Poirot's voice sharpened, and he pointed suddenly, dramatically, toward Robert Henshaw, the cricket captain. You, Monsieur Henshaw. The hall gasped as one. Henshaw lurched to his feet, his face drained of colour. Me? That's madness. I loved the game, I respected Latham. Poirot's moustaches twitched with satisfaction. Respected? No. Resentment, yes. You lost money to him in a wager. He mocked you, humiliated you before others. And more, he intended to reveal that you, the captain, had misused club funds for your own debts. He had the papers in his possession. You stood to be disgraced, ruined. Voila, your motive. Henshaw shook his head wildly. But the ball, it was Pennington who bowled. Poirot raised a hand. Precisely. That was your brilliance, monsieur. You coated the ball yourself before the match began, in the changing room, while others prepared. You relied on Pennington to deliver it, knowing suspicion would fall upon him. All the village would see only the obvious, the quarrelling partner, the bowler at the crease. Meanwhile, you, calm, genial captain, would escape suspicion. Henshaw staggered, clutching the back of his chair. It's not true. You can't prove it. Poirot's voice was silk, deadly silk. But I can. You see, when I examined the ball, I noticed not only the poison stain, but also a faint trace of Polish, boot polish. And who, among all, was seen polishing his boots in the pavilion before the match? You, Monsieur Henshaw. You combined the Polish with the poison, spreading it evenly upon the ball. The trace, it remained, too small for others, but not for Poirot. A stunned silence fell. The vicar crossed himself again. Mrs. Winthrop muttered, "Bless my soul," under her breath. Henshaw swayed, his eyes wild. You can't know that, no one saw me. Poirot smiled gently. No one but the little grey cells. And they do not lie. You betrayed yourself again last night, when I revealed the ball as the weapon. You flinched, monsieur, you trembled with fear. That is not the reaction of the innocent. The constable, present at the back, now stepped forward, laying a firm hand on Henshaw's arm. Henshaw's resistance crumbled. His face sagged, despair written upon it. Yes, he whispered hoarsely. Yes, it's true. He drove me to it. Always mocking, always threatening. He would have ruined me before them all. I thought I could be rid of him, and Pennington would hang in my place. It seemed clever. Poirot bowed his head slightly, his eyes grave. It was clever, monsieur. But you forgot, murder, however ingenious, always leaves its trace. And Hercule Poirot, he sees the trace. The villagers erupted in shocked whispers, some gasping, some shaking their heads. Mrs. Latham wept quietly behind her veil. Pennington sat rigid, a man reprieved from the noose. The vicar muttered a prayer of thanks. Miss Ward regarded Poirot with admiration, while Mrs. Winthrop was already preparing the tale she would spread through the village for weeks to come. Poirot lifted his hand, restoring silence. So, Miss Amos, the truth is known. Henry Latham is avenged. The murderer will face justice. Let this be a lesson: hatred and ambition, they lead always to destruction. And crime, however hidden, cannot outwit the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot. He bowed, his moustaches quivering with satisfaction, and stepped back. Later, as the hall emptied and the constable led Henshaw away, Major Fairley joined Poirot. His face was a mixture of awe and bewilderment. By Jove, Poirot, you've done it again. I'd never have suspected Henshaw, and not in 1,000 years. But you saw it all. Poirot smiled modestly. Non, mon ami. I saw only what was there. The truth, she was waiting. One need only look closely, and she reveals herself. He smoothed his moustache, glanced once more at the darkened cricket ground beyond the hall's window, and murmured, "It began with a game, but ended in death. Yet always, always, the end is the same, order restored, justice done." And with that, Hercule Poirot, elegant and unruffled, left the hall, his silhouette small but triumphant against the night.